Welcome to Arkham Horror and this week's lecture, which will be covering several different things. So I will pair the lecture material with the Arkham Horror game, which is a cooperative game for 1 to 8 players. It's 12 ages plus. It's a pretty complex game. There's a lot going on, so I'll work slowly to get through this content as efficiently as possible, and then we'll move on to the course content. So this game is set in sort of a 1920s mythos where there are various characters going around this map. At each one of these locations, the Southern or the French Hill, there are different encounters that will happen. So characters move through the game, you'll be traveling to these locations, and then at each location there will be some kind of encounter that they will have. The goal of the game is that you'll be facing up against these Ancient Ones, which are these Cthulhu creatures based from the H.P. Lovecraft myth and lore, and they will be utilized for the players to fight against. So there are multiple players. We work together in a cooperative interaction to gain resources, to gain skills, weapons, mystical elements, and magic, and then we will utilize those to face off against these creatures. This is one of the first games in the line of Arkham Horror, and there are several other ones, and they all have a similar interaction style with getting players to work with each other to face off against these Ancient Ones, and then to have a final battle if it comes to it. The game itself has a lot of different components, so we'll work through these general elements as of right now. We start off with being able to select from a range of different investigators. Each one will have a different ability. We also have a range of different Ancient Ones which we'll fight against. We place our characters on the board, whichever one we've selected. And those kind of start off at different locations in different areas. We'll fight off against a series of monsters that we will draw from cups at different times for the various interactions. And then we will also work to resolve or solve these portals. When we open a portal, we have to close it so the ancient creatures don't come across and attack the city of Arkham in this instance. To do that, we gain these tokens, and the tokens then seal off the gate, and they also then go on a Doom Tracker mark for the Ancient One. When we have collected enough of those Doom Track tokens, the monster is essentially defeated. We do have the opportunity to fight them directly at the end, but after we seek to kill them beforehand. We're also looking for clues. Clues help us out through the game. Our characters have a certain amount of health, which are the red hearts, and sanity, which are the blue brains. Those track the abilities and skills, as well as the health and sanity of the players. At different times, a player might go insane for some reason. Every time we come to an encounter or location, we draw one of those cards, and those cards tell us what to do, what actions to resolve on the game board. Again, our goal is to gain clues, move through the board, get these clues to seal off gates. Once we seal off gates, monsters stop coming through. And if we seal off enough gates or put enough of those tokens on the Ancient Ones, we're able to destroy them and end the game. And that is the goal as we work together to do this. To play the game, we have to do a couple of different things to help our characters along. So as I said before, you travel around this map of Arkham, and we're looking for things to help us out in our adventures. We each have our own characters, and we develop those independently of everybody else's, but hopefully we design a mechanic where we all work together in some way. So we have the characters up here in the upper right. Your characters will start at different locations, and they go to different areas to do different things. So some locations are better at finding magic weapons, some are better at finding clues, some are better at giving you resources such as money to move around the board a little bit easier. All of the cards on the left-hand side are the locations, so at each location you have a deck of different cards. Those different cards tell you what to do in each location. There's the city locations, and then below you'll notice there's the other worlds. Those are, you travel into those other worlds, resolve some interactions there, and then you come back onto the city map in order to close a gate. So we start off by putting, in order to close a gate, we have some of these tokens that we'll place on one of the areas. That token, once it's there on the game, limits any sort of portals from opening up again. So portals allow monsters to spawn, is the purpose there. So when we close a gate, we close the opportunity for monsters to spawn, or which will make the game more difficult. At the end of everybody's rounds, we pull one of these Mythos cards that will change the dynamics of the gameplay itself. They're overarching, large impacts upon the game. It's a mechanic that helps increase the complexity of the game. So these are the gates that you place at the beginning of the game. You place them out in different locations. They start to spawn every time you pull over one of those Mythos cards. So you pull one Mythos card, you place one gate over one location, that then spawns a monster, and then you have to either fight. You do have to fight and destroy that monster to get rid of it. You'll go into those portals transport you to the other world, you resolve some locations there, and you come back onto the game board. You can collect those tokens as well. Those count as points, and you can turn those in at the end of the game to, or during the game to get resources in that way. So again, the goal of the game is to kind of go through these portals, solve these things, and stop the monsters from invading and terrorizing the city of Arkham. What we're doing, again, is we're trying to fight against these ancient ones. They each have different numbers in their doom tracks. You'll notice that one has 13. Cthulhu also has 13. They have different numbers, and this means that you have more opportunities or less opportunities to try to destroy them, or they will awaken quicker. So that 13, if you get doom track tokens, if you lead up to 13, that's when the ancient one will awaken. So you're trying to stop them from doing that. So ancient ones are then fighting off against the investigators, which is the characters that you will choose from a wide selection of different individuals. They all have different starting skills, so they allow you to do different things. It's a cooperative game, so everybody's kind of working together to manage their players in different ways and to manage those tracks to give us different options during the game. So we'll fight off against Yig in this example. We'll choose a couple of different characters for us to fight against in this situation. Once you select a character, you take the elements or items that they start the game with, and you also then need to select from a range of different sliders what the skills or capabilities of that character are from the start of your turn. And at the start of your turn, every round, you get to change these by a little bit. So you notice that speed and sneak. Speed is your movement. Sneak is your ability to move past monsters. Fight is how strong you are. Your will is your ability to actually fight these crazy mystical entities or beings. Lore is how much knowledge you have for spell casting, and luck is the general luck element. You'll notice that you have that focus of 2, so you'll get 3 markers. So you might put your speed and sneak at 3. At the beginning of your turn, you might move that up to 5 and 1. So the focus is how much you can move it. Then the sanity and stamina, which were shown, is how much you start off the game with. So as we fight against these monsters, you'll notice that they also have like worshippers or -3. That means if you pull out a worshipper from the monster cup, they have different attributes as well. So you add all of this up together, there's a lot going on in this game, but we want to centralize on our ability to fight it, to limit the ability of the Ancient One to wake up, and our ability to defeat monsters and close gates throughout the game. It's one of the more complex cooperative games, and it can take a long time to play. I've played for 4 to 8 to 9 hours before, so there's a lot going on, as you can see from all of the different elements that are on this game board. But I think this game also offers us a really interesting opportunity to talk about many of the various game mechanics. So every turn you're able to do a couple of things. So we start off with several phases, and those dictate what we're going to be able to do, from our combat to our movements to our encounters in Arkham to the otherworld encounters in that Mythos phase. So what we do at the start of our turn is we set our character. We have that upkeep phase. In this instance, we have to decide where we're going to go on the board. We know what we need to decide that our character is going to do and how we're going to work and help out our fellow players. So we'll set our track markers on our game piece, Dexter Drake in this case, to what we want to be able to do. Again, we have a focus of 2, and that's going to allow us to move those markers 2 spaces. So we can move 1 2 spaces, or we can move 2 of them 1 space. This is going to help us decide what we're going to be able to do. If we want to move around monsters, we might sneak past them, or if we just need to start the game off and move through the game and get somewhere quickly, we might move our movement up to 5. So we decided what we're going to do. We talk to our other players about what's going on, and we move those markers around. The nice thing about this is that this player marker really holds a lot of information, and that's important in thinking about our games, is how much information can we put into a character piece. Or that way we remove some of that cognitive burden onto the game mat itself, onto the game board, and we're able to focus on our actions rather than kind of storing or having to store all of that memory ourselves. And it's also nice because this gives us some agency. We can make some choice in what we're going to be doing that turn. So every turn, we have the option to change our interactions or our tactics or our styles. So this game really offers a unique way to engage our characters with the game mechanics as well as with our other players. When it is our turn, we're going to do a couple of different things. We're going to move, and if we're in the other worlds, we're going to encounter that other world. If we're in Arkham, we'll encounter there. When we encounter, we draw a card from the encounter deck, and it tells us what we do. Depending on our location in the other world, this gives us insight. So that information is built into the cards, as well as into the locations. They'll all interact a little bit differently. So each of the other worlds, there's something else kind of going on. Just the same way, in each of the locations in Arkham, there are some different things that happen. So in Rivettown or in the south side, different engagements can occur. So we draw the card, we do whatever is on the card, and we resolve that interaction. It might be to draw a monster, it might be to move somewhere, it might be to fend off some thugs, and then we might also get some reward for doing that. We might get a weapon, or we might get access to a cult, or we might get access to a secret society. But we'll get some sort of reward. We'll also get some sort of punishment if we fail to do that. So this is where some of that luck from our skill slider comes into play, is that if we have a lot of luck, we roll dice, and we can gain access to hidden treasures and hidden rewards. And so that's how our characters begin to increase and gain skills. Again, if we come out or we encounter another world, we return to the map based on that same location where we entered into. After we have moved and made an encounter, we then pull over a Mythos card. The Mythos card tells us what we're supposed to do at the end of the phase, after every player has moved. So the wood, it spawns a gate, so we put a gate at that location. It also tells us a headline, what is kind of going on in the world around us. There was 2 monsters that are released in the south side street, so we take a couple of monsters and we put them there. We also notice that there's a clue. Those are those green clue tokens that we place at the Historical Society. And then there's also that circle in the white and square and diamond in the black. That tells us where to move monsters around that different area. Again, as I was pointing to the yig, we have to be aware of what's happening on that card as well. So, end game goal of what we're doing here, remember, is that we're these investigators. We're trying to face off against these ancient ones and defeat them in some way. We're using our skills. We're building up our powers in various ways, and we're moving through this complex board map. We're using dice to do that, to roll around. Our character cards are storing much of that information, and then the boss also has information stored on it. So the information, the cognitive load, is put into the game board itself as we seek to destroy the Ancient One and save Arkham from the horrors that have descended upon it from this H.P. Lovecraftian lore. So the mechanics and the theme work really well together to complement what is going on and what we're supposed to be doing in the game, what our characters are supposed to be doing, and how we balance skill sets, the rewards and interactions that we get from this game. Well, while I assume that most of us have not played Arkham Horror before, this is a great game, and I really encourage you to move beyond my overly simplistic explanation of the game and play the game or watch some other detailed tutorials to figure out how the game is played. I will utilize this game, though, as a frame of reference in the lecture for today to give us something to kind of cohere some of the content to and explain what is going on and how we might be able to think about some of the rules and readings that we have from the chapter. A couple of things that we're going to cover this week are the 4 big issues of cost, reward, downtime, and busy work. What these are going to do is get us to think about how elements of metagaming or what it is that we're doing while we're playing, what else is going on, and how do we bring players into our game, keep them entertained, and keep the complex strategy evolving while they play. The first element we'll talk about is cost. So when we think about cost, these are the things that it takes for us to enter into the game. What cognitive burdens are we placing upon the player? So what obstacles do we have? As we see with Arkham Horror, there's a lot going on. As we add more expansions, the tables that we play on can get quite complex. So the game itself has a lot of information into it, so we want to be aware of how long does it take players to learn our games, what are the consequences of that, what rewards do they get if they are able to learn those rules and play in it. So what's the burden of entering into the game? How much time does it take us to learn the game itself, all of the rules, and then what skills do we need to play? For most of our games, I assume that the skills are going to be pretty straightforward. So dice rolling, card playing, card management, but we want to think about what are we asking the player to do? How complex are these interactions? If we have some sort of physical challenge or skill challenge, that's something we also need to consider. So when we think about cost, what are we asking the players to do when they play the game itself? The second part of cost is the skills that are expressed that players bring to the game. Those are expressed in different ways, especially as we start to play the game with different groups. Group members and individuals have different skill sets that they'll bring to the table. So if we're playing a cooperative game like Arkham, and in this instance where we have 7 players playing the game, it's going to be a complex set of interactions. Everybody's going to do something a little bit differently. So we want to understand what skills we're bringing to the table and how do we cultivate those or bring those out of our players. If we have a competitive game, many players like competition, they like that direct confrontation. Many people don't, so we want to consider what are we asking our players to do and how do they engage in that process. Also, we might ask players to do specific things, so we might put one player in a leadership position, or one person might be a communicator role. So if we think about Pandemic, there are multiple types of roles that people do, and they kind of embody those roles. So what are we asking our players to do, and what skill sets are we bringing about in players? Do we allow them to bring that to the table, or do we provide those skill sets for them? The final element of cost is getting us to think about how do we scale the complexity and challenges of games while allowing players to increase their skills. So we want to seek to cultivate player skill, allow them to engage the game in multiple times, and that's that idea of replayability. So we want to make sure that we're able to do something rather than coming back to the same static state of a game. Arkham Horror does this really well in that the game has a lot of variability to it. It has a lot of random elements that occur at different times. It has some dice roll, but it also has a large deck of cards that allows us to pull out different interactions. Then it has some expansions that make this more complex. But we want to be able to have some complexity, some randomness to it, so we can increase the challenge and make it different every time we play the game. It's not the same type of thing, but also that'll allow us to increase our player skill. So we're not completely reliant on random dice rolls, because that can be really boring if we're just rolling the dice. While that's random, it doesn't allow for skill development. So how do we become better players at playing our games is a key thing to think about the cost of being able to replay our games. The second large element that I want to talk about is rewards. So what do we get from playing these games? This often comes from winning. If it's a cooperative game, we all win together or we all lose together. If it's a competitive game, we beat other players, which can be frustrating for many individuals, or that can be very rewarding as well. So how do we win the game? We also might want to think about, do we get this from points? Do we get this from player elimination? How does that occur? But we also have satisfaction from playing well. So there's the well-played game. Did we all have a good time playing the game? And this gets us to start to think about what player experience we're trying to create. Is this an escapist element? Is this social interaction that we're developing? What is the enjoyment that comes from these challenges? If it's the same type of challenge and we're doing the same thing, that's not very enjoyable. But if there are multiple different things happening, that can be more enjoyable. So what is the experience that we're trying to create is a key element, and I'll ask you about this when you present your games. But also, what rewards do players get from playing your game specifically? The second component of rewards is very similar to cost. It's just a reiteration of it while we're playing the game. So the idea that how do we improve? What rewards do we get from playing your game multiple times? Many games have a lot of strategy built into them. So I think about how is strategy built into our games, specifically within the board game that we're designing. So within Arkham Horror, we have a lot of different strategies that develop from it, and we can have different characters that allow us to play the game a little bit differently. It gives us a different feel to it. So easy gameplay can be really limiting, and is that we don't have anything to improve upon. We have no reason to come back to your game. So we want to make sure that we offer that replay ability. And also to consider this idea of additive play, that it can become repetitive if we're just doing the same movements over and over again that create parallel or similar experiences. So think about questions. Why would we play your game again? What are the players doing to improve it the next time? What experiences are we creating for the players? And then what are the rewards that we get from your game, and what's the cost of or burden of entering into your game? The third large element that I want to talk about is downtime. So what are you doing when you're not actively playing the game? What are you doing when you're waiting around? So, right, Settlers of Catan, longest turn, people can take forever to take their turns. If you have 4 people playing, it could be 20 minutes before you get your turn. So what are players doing while you're waiting for other individuals? So it can really be a negative, but it can also be a positive. Maybe part of your game is socializing, getting people to talk about something. This is Cards Against Humanity is really great at this because it brings us together and we have something to talk about. So what happens in that downtime? If there's not a lot of interaction between players, that downtime can be enormous, right? It makes the game drag on. So think about being able to combine play turns together. Maybe all the players play at one time. In Arkham Horror, we're always trying to strategize together. So what are we doing with that? And how are we trying to negotiate our player? What might we do in the future to make sure that downtime doesn't feel so long? So how much downtime is there versus not playing? What are players doing during that downtime? What are they doing when they're out of the game? How do we keep players involved? The last thing about this I want to talk about too, downtime, is that we need to think carefully about this downtime and what we're actually doing in it. So the more interested we are in other people's turns, the more downtime is mitigated or changed. What I mean by this is, if we're actively involved in watching other people, that's going to be really exciting. In Arkham Horror, we might be paying attention to the roles other people make. We have options and abilities that can help out other players, so we might offer a re-roll, or we might offer a spell to help somebody else out. So we can work with each other. In other games, we're just simply watching, or it becomes a solitaire experience where we have a tableau or something in front of us that we just focus on. And at the end of the game, then we reflect on other people's movements. So we want to be sure that we're looking at the heuristics. What is going on in the game states? How do they change? How might I add to that game state so I can be continually a part of the gameplay? And then we also might think about how downtime can increase tension. So if there's bluffing or traders, we have large pauses that can create anxiety. So think about utilizing downtime as efficiently as possible. One way to frame that efficiency is really to think about some questions about what we're doing. So why are turn-based elements so exciting? Why are they dominant in board games and not online? What are we doing, right? Online, we have a lot of direct interaction, so we're doing things simultaneously. That might be a resource to draw upon for your game. Also, how does player elimination affect that downtime? If you're not playing, you're doing something else. So if we do have a lot of player elimination, then the game turns might go a lot faster. Like poker, we move through it. If it's an Arkham Horror, we have the opportunity to be resurrected. So we can come back to life in the game, we start off with a new character. So consider those elements of how do we bring players back into that game experience. A third element related to that downtime is the idea of busy work. What are we doing that's a part of the game? Is it relevant and necessary? Can we be doing this while other players are taking their turns to shrink down the time span of our game? So upkeep, can we all do this at once? If it's pure upkeep, these are the operations that maintain play, so just dealing and setting those cards out. We might think about every player having the opportunity to draw cards at one time, something along these lines. Another thing is incomprehensible actions that move the gameplay along. We don't know what the busy work of rolling the dice is going to be because we don't know the outcome, so that's just a part of it. And then we also have these low effort actions, this busy work that we have to do, moving our characters. If it takes us forever to move in Arkham Horror, the game lasts a lot longer. So being able to prepare ahead of time and have your movements going makes the game flow and move at a faster rate, which makes the game more enjoyable. Busy work can also be outsourced, so we might think through iterative design how we can build in some of that busy work into the game structure. So we have these player cards, these player mats work really well. If we have a tableau building, and at some point we can build that content and information into what's in front of us so we can focus on the gameplay itself. So through our iterative design, think about ways that you can move some of the complexities or challenges that you're facing into this player aid that either tracks movement, it's attack, or something along these lines. And this also then allows the board to serve as a referee and to mitigate some of those rules. A complexity or difficulty between board games and video games is that video games, the system manages all of the rules itself, so we don't have to pay attention to that, which makes them enjoyable. In board games, we do. Part of it is learning and understanding those rules, which can be enjoyable, but it can also be frustrating. So if we can move some of that rule structure onto a player mat, it removes some of that burden and allows us to focus on the interactions that we're trying to create as game designers. One of the final elements we need to think about is the reward to effort ratio. So how much energy are we putting into doing something? If we spend a lot of time setting up a game, Arkham Horror can take a long time to set up. So is the reward of playing it worth it? Well, getting to play with 5, 6, 7, 8 people in a cooperative game can be really enjoyable, but it can often be a large burden if it's just 1 or 2 players, or you have to do this repetitively. So oftentimes a complex game like this doesn't get played. So how much work are we asking our players to do? That's both with setup, understanding the rules, as well as player interaction. If there's a lot to do during each turn, this can often be a burden. So one of the things to think about too with this is that we're calculating a lot of content and a lot of mathematics, or a lot of information. A lot of Steffenfeld games do this. Arkham Horror does have a lot of math to it, but it's built into many of the cards and to the dice itself, which helps us manage these elements easily. But we want to think about how far ahead of the game can we plan. In Arkham, we can sort of plan one turn, one round out ahead of time. As that Mythos card comes out, it changes the structure of the game, and we might be asked to do different things. So we have one round of planning that we can do. In other games, we might be able to plan out 6, 7, 9 turns. Right? In chess, there's a lot of planning that you can do. In other games, you may be only able to plan right before your turn comes up, because the variability and randomness of dice rolls can change what you're going to be doing. So what is that effort of planning ahead? That can be really exciting, but really frustrating if your turn changes frequently. We also need to be aware of how many levels of strategy and techniques are there. How many different ways are there to engage with the game that we're playing. Finally, we just need to be aware of what's the ratio that we're creating. How much effort is going into this? Are we just doing something to grind through it? It can be really tedious to grind through Arkham Horror to just get a weapon or a skill set or a spell. It's not exciting, so we want to be able to put those into practice and utilize those. If it takes a long time to get a specific spell, that might not be worth it for us to do it, especially if that's a weak spell. If it takes us a short amount of time to get a really strong spell, that's a different problem altogether. So we want to be able to balance that ratio of what it is that we're doing and think about increasing different areas. If we're having problems with powers and effects, maybe we decrease the power and effect, or maybe we decrease the difficulty to get those powers. We should need to work on balancing all that together.